Okay, so I don't want to talk for 15 minutes. I wanted to use this opportunity just to brainstorm with all of you. And so I'll be relatively provocative. And the idea was to really get some of your experiences and thoughts on some of my thoughts. And yeah, so let me get started. So what happened starting the middle of March was really this series of lockdowns that spread across the world. And in some ways they were very similar, and in other ways they were very different. And so I wanted to talk about some things in the Indian case that have really bothered me that were different, and to get some sense from you about what you know about what was going on elsewhere. And then make the case that the debate has really, some of the debate has really been misleading, in the sense that it's been this lives versus livelihoods debate. And I think what that's done is it's taken away from some of the details of these lockdowns that I think in the Indian case certainly have undermined some of our democratic institutions. So I just want to provide some details on that, and then please interrupt me anytime. I don't have a set of results or anything to present. So it's mainly just to put some ideas in front of you and see what you think, and also get input from you about what's been going on elsewhere, because so much has been going on and people just know different bits of the picture. And that's what I thought would be really useful for this session. So I'm going to say that while we were talking about this contagion of the coronavirus, I feel there was a policy contagion. So it was almost as if something started somewhere. And in the Indian case, I don't know if it's true because I don't know what policymakers were thinking, but I think some of what happened was that US companies and multinationals said, you know, some people can work from home. Some of the multinationals in India, you know, others said you can work from home. And then somehow state governments came in before the national government and announced relatively short lockdowns for a few days. Kerala did, Delhi did for a week. And very soon this then just went into the national lockdown. And I mean, maybe this is true, maybe it wasn't, but maybe it was just some amount of, there was some amount of posturing for sure, and some of it was probably needed. But that's where I'm saying I'm being critical, because some of it was certainly that I can do this better than you, or I care about lives more than you. And then we went into a relatively serious lockdown, and the senses in which it's been quite different from other places. I'd like to point out in terms of three important pillars of democracy. One is equality before the law at the individual level. The second is structures, institutional structures, in particular, the structures of federalism and the relationship between the center and the states. And the third is the media. So I'll just briefly say a few things on each of those, and then I'll stop and open it up and see what your thoughts are. So one thing that was quite dramatic in India was that it didn't allow its own citizens in. So it was one of the very, I don't know of other cases where you basically said you could be Indian, but if you're elsewhere, you're not coming in. And so then this happened at the state level, and it happened at the, I mean, the national lockdown made sure that this was also true of the states. And so people just couldn't move and go back home, which was extreme. Another feature at the individual level that was problematic was a lot of the anti-Muslim sentiment that was created, I feel, was done partly because you really did non-random testing. So your methods were that we will go and test wherever we think the disease is. And so we will look under the lampposts that we put up rather than look more broadly. And so this created a particular notion of how the virus was spreading. And it certainly meant that Muslims were targeted. There was a lot of anti-Muslim sentiment created. So those are a couple of things at the individual level. As far as the media is concerned, the government submitted to the Supreme Court that only the official version of news should be published. Luckily, the Supreme Court knocked it down. But again, that's an important element of democracy that was being threatened. Then we have the federalism point where power was taken away from local and state levels to the center. So you had the Epidemic Diseases Act of 1897. And in fact, it was this act that was used both by Kerala and Delhi and other states that announced the lockdown. And so what happened is that the center imposed the National Disaster Management Act of 2005. And this gave it the power to impose things on the states. Now, constitutionalists, and there was a very good article by Prashant Bhushan in the Hindu yesterday, which said that this itself is completely unconstitutional. So you can't really take away executive authority from the states and legislative authority from the states in the way that they've done this. So what that meant really is that while the center was telling states that they have to quarantine people, they have to do various things, even at a micro level, it was all managed by the center. So although the states are responsible for health, and in the Constitution, if you talk about contagion, then it's in list 3 of the Constitution, which means that both the center and the states are to be involved here. But the center pretty much ran roughshod over the states. And even things like how much protective gear the states were getting, it was decided and dispatched from the center, rather than just giving the states the money and saying, go and buy whatever you need. And revenues obviously dried up. So 90% in many states, 90% of revenues come from petroleum and alcohol sales. And so these revenues completely dried up. States were not given loans from the center. In fact, a lot of guarantees that they had under the GST system, where if they didn't meet revenues, then they would be given transfers from the states. So the states were asking for those transfers, which didn't come through except in small trickles. And so I think my question to all of you firstly is, are there other experiences in other countries that parallel this? Is it useful to think about this in political economy terms? So while there were lockdowns all over the world, was political rent seeking in India driving the particular form of the lockdown that was occurring here, namely very strict restrictions on individuals and organizations apart from the central government, and no lead time. So no one was allowed to adjust before the lockdown came into place. So that's pretty much what I want to say, that if we turn this debate away from the lives versus livelihoods and really said that, look, focus on the goal. Suppose the goal was only lives for the moment. That would be the case that would be most pro the lockdown in some sense. Are there alternative policies that could have saved more lives? And can we understand why they were not followed, either through some kind of political economy model, or was it just stupidity, or what was it? Incompetence? And so I'll stop there and just have your thoughts.
Okay, thanks very much, Rohini. I think to have a natural flow to the discussion, I think it makes sense for people to step in, when they want to ask something or have a view to express. But if you want, if any of you want to share a thought and you're not quite sure when to step in, please send it to Amrit in a private chat, and he will feed that to me. So yes, anybody, please go ahead if you have any questions for Rohini or any response.
So I'll have a go. I mean, you said, stepping aside from the lives versus livelihood debate. I mean, that itself, I find hard. But even assuming, as you said, that it's just about saving lives. So I think what we don't have much information on, and what could sort of speak to some of the things you're raising, is, the center, it's becoming more centralized, right? In some sense, where you're snapping off the privileges of the states, their rights, actually. It would be interesting to see if this varies across states which are BJP led versus not. I mean, is there some implicit sort of soft, handling of states which are BJP led, or is it actually uniform? So that's one thing we don't know about that, right?
Well, it's funny because I think there's evidence certainly with Kerala, and the problem is a lot of the BJP states just are bad performers in general. And so, what Kerala has been remarkable in that it's basically had no additional fatalities for quite a while now. It's had 3 deaths that are attributed to the coronavirus. It has a fair amount of testing, and it just has no fatalities over the last few weeks. And Kerala wanted to really free up a couple of districts, and it said that, look, there's been nothing going on here. It issued an order to do this. It got a letter the following day from the Home Ministry saying you're violating the national lockdown. And I think because the Kerala Chief Minister is a really astute politician, he doesn't want to get into a fight with the center. And so he basically said publicly that, yes, we withdraw this, we're completely on the center side, because the center has all the money right now. It has all the money and it has all the power to let the states borrow or not borrow. So it really, from the Reserve Bank. And so they're really stuck if they don't toe the line. And so Kerala is the most obvious example of that, where they've actively cracked down on Kerala.
I think, I'm pretty sympathetic with nearly everything that you said, and I find myself thinking the same way. One point on which I'll make an objection is this idea that the center might have been better off, giving states money and asking them to procure PPE by themselves, as opposed to sort of directly providing them PPE. And that's what's been happening in the U.S. States have been, asked to get what they need in terms of ventilators and PPE, and what they find is that they're competing with each other and driving prices up, and not leading to an equitable distribution of.
I see. Yeah, I mean, the thing is that it's not, there are 2 things here. One is procurement, and the other is just, the purchase at the state level. So this could potentially just be split up. It could be that the central government is procuring them. It gives states funds based on whatever it wants, any formula that's a transparent formula. And then states can purchase out of a central pool where the center gets the best price from China or Taiwan or wherever it's getting this equipment from. So yeah, there are lots of potential mechanisms. But right now what was happening is central teams actually going to states to figure out whether they're doing a good job or not, whether the states are doing a good job. And then actually dispatching the numbers of these masks and other pieces of equipment that they thought the state should have. And so I think it's more the procurement from abroad could be done anyway, but you think actually, is that Amrit or who was it that was asking?
Yeah, me, Amrit.
Yeah. So do you mean the problems with procuring from abroad, or do you mean just even internally?
I meant both. Whether the production is domestic or external, you might have a situation where, well, in the U.S., New York is competing with California for the same goods.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of, if you're transparent, Amrit, there are lots of ways around this. So the center could even say, look, we have the expertise to tell you what is of high enough quality. We have a relatively simple mechanism to equate demand and supply. And all of this could be done quite easily. We do it for so many things. There's a lot of procurement that goes on all the time. I see their pitfalls. It just seems that there must be something between this system and
So I see that Irma and Sabyasachi have raised their hands. So why don't we start? Sabyasachi, would you like to ask your question?
Sure, thanks. Nice set of points, Rohini. I wanted to say that with regard to the media, I was just looking at the Reporters Without Borders website. They have a very nice compilation of cases across countries where, in the wake of coronavirus, various governments have tried to sort of curb media freedom. And
I see.
If you follow some of the cases, then you can see whether in
Can other people hear Sabyasachi?
No, we've lost you. Should we? We've lost you. Why don't we go to Irma, and then hopefully we can try again.
Okay, hi, Rohini. I just want to say that I share your concerns, and not only the lockdown is affecting the freedom of people all over the world, and there is the question of whether our democratic rights are at stake or are under risk because of this. And this is something that we should think about, even though we need to think about the lives versus livelihoods debate as well. My question was very related to Sabyasachi's one, is what can we have any evidence on whether the media has been hiding stuff, or is there any way in which we can see where it actually took place? That some of the information have been.
Irma also?
I'm hearing Irma. Irma, are you there?
Hello, yes, I'm here.
Yeah. Could you just say the last 1 minute
yes,
again?
I was just wondering as well about the media, whether we have any information about whether the media has been hiding information or kind of.
Yeah, no, I don't know about hiding information. I think one of the nice things about this group is really the kind of sharing of stuff that's out there that gets done. So you sent a very nice piece, and then Arijit sent a very nice piece. But one thing that I know for sure is that the media's advertising revenues have dried out completely with the lockdown. So a lot of the institutions that support democracy in India, the NGO sector is very powerful, and the media is relatively open. But I do know from friends that the media is reluctant to publish controversial things. And so it's been mainly online media that's been doing it because they're afraid of a long chain reaction. As it is, they don't have advertising money coming in. And then if companies feel that they will be victimized if they advertise in newspapers that criticize the government. So I don't know, there'll be some bit where you could get onto formal curbs, but to get onto this whole informal structure would be hard to figure out. It would take some digging.
And another example where the center took control of the different states, well, in this case, the autonomous communities, is Spain.
So tell us a little bit
autonomous
about that.
Communities are in charge of health.
Yes.
However, with the pandemic, the state declared the state of alarm, put the army in the streets, got control of everything, and even got PPE equipment from some states to the center to distribute in the way they wanted to do it, which is not clear that is the best solution. But
I think it's hard to know.
Kind of the first reaction they had was just to centralize everything.
Right. But this is the point. I think that if you can look at particular policies and say that, look, you lost more lives doing that, and it's not something that was unknown, but something that you would have naturally known. Like anybody knows in India that if you look at the size of the workforce that's migrant, although it's true, I think it's made them a lot more visible than they were. But everybody knows that they're living in far more cramped surroundings than they would be if they were allowed to return home. They're mostly using community toilets. They don't have kitchens. And so this stuff is widely known. And so, if they had been given a few days to get back to wherever they wanted to get back, you would clearly have saved lives. One more thing related to institutions, the NGO sector is also really funds are really drying up in the NGO sector. So their ability also to come in and say, look, this is going on the ground is being curtailed.
So we have a little lineup of questions. Let's go back to Sabyasachi since he's returned, and then Sanchari and Purikit. So take it away.
Yeah. Sorry, I got disconnected. So, Rohini, can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can.
One thing I just wanted to mention that, I'm doing a little bit of analysis, which I'll present in the next week about not within India, but across countries, looking some of these institutions and policy responses in a very sort of broad overview way. And trying to see whether there are differences across countries depending on to what extent the chief executive controls power in the country, and whether that matters for policy response.
Right, great. Are you using this Oxford database? Has anyone been looking at it at all? The Blavatsky database on stringency?
Yes, we use that, the Oxford data set, yes.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because it classifies, it has 18 different measures. And it looks at containment and economic policy and health policy. I haven't really looked at it very much, but it seems that there's a lot there.
Yeah.
So we need to get going on to Ritika's presentation soon, but why don't we I think Sanchari had a question and Purikit after that.
Hi Rohini.
Hi Sanchari.
Hi, not really a question, but one just to follow a little bit about the point that Anirban was making about whether BJP states might be dealing with this differently. And I completely take your point about, Kerala being an outlier here as always. But actually I just wanted to share an anecdote, which is that when we were nearing the end of the first lockdown, there was many of you might know that there was this small committee that was set up in Karnataka with sort of well-placed health professionals and some civil servants and maybe members of the civil society to sort of draft a plan of what is going to be the exit plan coming out of the lockdown. This was before it was extended, and that document was shared in WhatsApp, and it was a sort of verified piece of information, so it was not junk. And there actually the proposal that came out of the expert committee is that there is no need to go in for further sort of extended full lockdowns. We should do a graded, calibrated approach, which is sort of using data that is coming up from more broad-based testing. So this is just to say that it's not entirely clear that there is a very clean BJP non-BJP separation, although yes, Kerala does make a case in the point regarding a non-BJP state being sort of clamped down and told, okay, you're violating and so on and so forth. The response was quite graded here, as far as I remember, in Bangalore, where they said, okay, we're going to listen to, we're going to wait for what the central government is saying. But I remember that as far as the state government's initiative to actually understand and prepare for a way out, it was not really going in for this blanket lockdown and looking at a more gradual and a more graded, calibrated approach. So that's just one point. And the other thing is more a comment, Rohini. I feel that I wanted to extend a little bit the concern you were raising about sort of individual freedoms being clamped down. My other worry is, and I think you also touch upon this, is whether this will then become sort of, a pathway towards greater surveillance and greater sort of further clamping down as a kind of a normal way forward, especially for a scared and compliant population. So, I think we are seeing across the board in various parts of the world where already populism and populist initiatives were probably sort of, on the rise and being battered down a little bit here and there, but coming up. But in the midst, and I just feel that, COVID-19 came and played into the hands of a lot of these things, gave them a lucky break in a way that certain things that may have eventually happened, who knows, but they would have faced more resistance, might be possible to, normalize, given that the population is scared and the population is, wary, and we don't know where this is going. So in the presence of a lot of uncertainty, some clear directive, whether it's right or wrong, might actually drive things forward in a different path than may have been done otherwise.
Absolutely. I think your survey, when you said that a lot of people felt that it was necessary, the fact is that a lot of India's poor faces incredible health risk. And so if you tell them that, look, this is something that's life-threatening,
yes,
people will put up with a great deal. And so that counterfactual is important. What would people have done in the absence if they were just made aware of the risk, but there were no restrictions?
Yes.
Yeah. Parikit?
So my question is with respect to federalism, right? So I think it's useful to sort of think about the normative aspect of the federalism question, how much to centralize power, especially in sort of special contingencies like this, versus the political economy aspect of federalism, right? There are obvious coordination benefits. For example, it's an infectious disease, right? So if suppression measures are not, there's a benefit for coordinating suppression measures. And what the US, they're talking about is, different states are suppressing at different points, and then the infection is spreading from one state to another. Then there's economies of scale in procurement, which you mentioned. But on the other hand, for example, Amartya Lahiri's article says that even from the normative perspective, if different states take different approaches, maybe there's something to learn from the policy experimentation. So you can stick to a kind of a normative framework, assuming a world where governments are all acting in good faith, right? So even in that sort of hypothetical context, there are pros and cons to sort of ramping up or toning down federalism or concentrating power. Unfortunately, to the extent, there are coordination benefits, and normatively we would like to centralize at moments like this, that also gives the central government power which is open to abuse, right? And that's what we are seeing, and I don't think it's sort of special to COVID. GST, for example, is an example of sort of centralizing tax collection much more because of some coordination benefits. The FRBM Act, the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management, again, fiscal coordination. But all of those things are now coming up in discussion, and with this allegation that the center is playing its political games, and for example, the borrowing limits on the states hasn't been relaxed at all, and people are seeing political motives. So how do we sort of approach it when, from a normative point of view, we see certain advantages to coordination, to certain sort of centralization, but then we are afraid that it is open to abuse. Do we go by the sort of worst possibility? What could a worst government do, abusing these powers, or how do we think about it? How do we, make constitutional decisions about federalism in this kind of scenario?
Yeah, I think by thinking precisely that, where is their local information? Where is it that the state's incentives to do something are actually stronger than the center's incentives? So you can't at one level say that, look, the states should be responsible for getting the food to people, they should be responsible for the testing, but then the center should actually decide whether the demarcation of containment zones or red, yellow, and green zones should be done at the central level. So I think the first line of reasoning should be, okay, suppose you think that there's a coordination benefit here, then let's just look at that benefit, and then let's see whether the policies, what that implies for the policies that should come in. So what's happening right now is that the coordination story doesn't go through in the sense of what they're allowing the states to do. In fact, what they're forcing the states to do, and then they're killing state autonomy. So they're not allowing the states to actually decide, take micro level decisions that clearly the states have more information about. And at the same time, they're deciding what the states should do in terms of healthcare provision, kits, and things like that. So I think the best way to proceed on that is say, let's take the best case for the coordination. Where are the advantages? And then are these policies matching up to that? So I don't know, I think one useful thing that I find is, let's not disagree about goals. Let's actually take any set of goals and that we agree on. And for that goal, let's just look at the details of the particular policies in place and see where we're going wrong.
So Jackie, over to you.
Yeah. Okay, so thanks very much, Rohini. We can continue this discussion at the end of the second presentation. But now I think if Ritika is ready, we can move on to the second presentation.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so if you just go ahead and share your screen, Ritika,
yes,
you can get started.